Can you imagine a legendary strip club owner just getting off work at dawn, gunned down with 5 shots right outside his home, all because he fired an employee? Mark Kalkani, that was his name, a man known, respected, and admired by those who worked the night. Mark wasn't just a manager, he was the heartbeat of the Condor Club. The Condor Club isn't just any bar. Since 1964, it has stood as a landmark of American nightlife, a pioneer once dubbed the first topless club in the country. But far from the seediness that many might imagine, the Condor had evolved into a celebrated institution deeply rooted in the cultural and entertainment history of San Francisco. And Mark had been there through it all. Decades of change, he remained a constant known for treating dancers with dignity, managing the chaotic energy of nightlife with grace, and earning admiration across the board. He wasn't just respected, he was beloved. So when the Condor Club's Facebook account posted a somber black and white photo with a single word, "Remembering," followed by Mark Kalkani, the city's nightlife held its breath. How could someone like him end up dead? San Francisco has always danced on the edge of darkness and delight. The North Beach district glows each night with neon-echoing jazz and the low hum of whispered secrets. 2 names surfaced, names that would paint a disturbing picture of what might have happened behind the velvet curtains and under the glimmer of stage lights. Richard Lawn, sometimes listed as Lund, 43 years old. He worked as a barback at the club doing the dirty work behind the scenes, scrubbing floors, stocking ice, keeping his head low. He was no stranger to the law. In fact, his criminal record dated back 2 decades, theft assault, and a deeply disturbing charge involving a minor that left a permanent stain on his name. Since then, he kept to the margins, a ghost behind the bar. Then there was Asia Lozano Morton, 25. Young, driven, and seemingly full of ambition. Her LinkedIn profile painted her as a passionate bartender committed to growing in her career. She smiled in every photo, charming, bright-eyed. But something about that smile in hindsight felt too perfectly placed, too polished. They weren't just co-workers, they were roommates living together in nearby Dublin. And when Mark was found lifeless, the trail somehow led directly to their doorstep. Morton didn't stick around. By the time whispers of the crime began to spread through the nightlife community, she was already gone on a flight to Spain. But she didn't get far. Authorities intercepted her at San Francisco International Airport upon her return. She looked calm, collected, as if nothing had happened. But in her suitcase wasn't just luggage, she carried secrets. Secrets the police were desperate to unlock. Charged as an accessory to murder, Morton became a puzzle piece that investigators hoped would help solve the nightmare. But what was her real role? Did she know about the plan? Did she help? Or was she caught in something far darker than she realized? As for Richard, his arrest was swift and silent. The charges were severe: murder, 2 counts of illegal firearm possession, and an enhancement because of his prior convictions. He's being held without bail. A man with that kind of past working just feet away from Mark every night. How long had the tension been building? The details of the killing remain shrouded in silence. No weapon has been publicly identified, no motive officially released. But investigators confirmed they were examining communication records, trying to uncover if Morton had been in contact with anyone, coworkers, lovers, friends, about what might have happened that night. And that question lingers like smoke in the air. Was this premeditated? Could a man so respected, so entrenched in the fabric of the city's nightlife, be taken out not in a crime of passion, but in a cold, deliberate plot? Police are not ruling anything out. But behind the laughter, the lights, and the stories of velvet-gloved glamour, there's a darker tale. A tale that no one talks about too loudly. A tale that left a stain no amount of stage glitter could cover up. At night, the music stopped and the piano rose. It all started in 1964. The Condor Club made headlines for something no one in America had dared before it became the nation's first topless nightclub. The woman at the center of it all, Carol Doda, a name now etched in both scandal and history. She wasn't just a dancer. She was a revolution in high heels, gliding across the stage and making her grand entrance atop a white baby grand piano, which rose slowly from beneath the stage like a spirit summoned by jazz and smoke. Carol's show was more than performance, it was a phenomenon. The Condor Club became a pilgrimage site for the curious, the rich, the lonely, and the lost. Tourists packed the place, locals whispered, and in the shadows of the back room, legends were born. Jump to the 1980s. The world had changed, disco had died, glamour turned to grit, and North Beach's golden shine had begun to rust. Yet, the Condor still stood like an aging star who refused to leave the stage. By now, Carol was gone. New dancers had taken her place, but the piano, the iconic elevator lift piano, remained. To this day, no one knows the full truth. There were no security cameras pointed at the stage. The club was near empty. Witnesses gave shaky, conflicting stories. The police ruled it a tragic mishap, but to many it felt like a cover-up, a convenient end to a deeply inconvenient death. Even now, it thrived. It was designated a legacy business by the city of San Francisco. Unlike other clubs in the Tenderloin or Soma, the Condor wasn't seen as dangerous or dirty. It was history. It was art. It was nightlife made flesh. Much of its survival is credited to Mark Calcani, a towering figure in the city's after-dark world. They called him larger than life, the Mount Rushmore of SF nightlife, and most often the dancer's protector. He managed the Condor like a museum curator guarding a masterpiece. He restored its image, protected its staff, and told reporters, "We honor the past here, even the shadows." But Mark never spoke of that night, and when asked, he simply said, "Some stories belong to the walls." At 6:25 a.m. on October 3, 2025, the quiet of Brookwood Avenue in Santa Rosa broke the way thin glass breaks sudden, sharp, unforgettable. A neighbor out with a dog turned toward the street's bike lane and froze. Moments later, a 911 call went out, and within minutes, police cruisers slid to a stop beneath the first gray light of morning. The man lying on the asphalt was quickly identified, 60-year-old Mark Calcani, a longtime fixture in San Francisco nightlife and general manager of the storied Condor Club in North Beach. The early reports said little. The scene said everything. This was deliberate. This was close. And whoever did it had chosen the hour when most people are just waking, when the world is too sleepy to understand what's just happened. From there, the story travels fast and dark. Calcani wasn't just a name on a payroll sheet. He was the connective tissue of two venues, Condor Club and Vanity San Francisco, known to anyone who's ever walked the Broadway-Columbus intersection at night. Colleagues would later describe him as a steady hand and a guardian of the room's rhythm, a manager who made the chaos look choreographed. That morning in Santa Rosa, the rhythm stopped. Police marked off the bike lane near Birdfoot Way and began the routine that never feels routine. Lock down the perimeter, log every shell casing, knock on doors, and pull every camera feed that might have watched the street while the city slept. As sunlight climbed, the neighborhood detectives with the Violent Crimes Investigations team started piecing together the movements that preceded the attack. Witness interviews, security footage, digital traces, a mosaic formed. This wasn't random, and it wasn't messy for long. In the days that followed, investigators reached a chilling working theory. Someone had waited for Calcani to come home from a late shift, and when he did, the ambush unfolded in seconds. Police would soon put a name to that theory. They would call it lying in wait. 3 weeks of pressure followed. Rumors swirled through the nightlife community, but the case stayed sealed while detectives kept digging. They chased the thin threads that always matter: what phones said when no one else was listening, what traffic cameras caught at the edges of a frame, what a neighbor's doorbell recorded by accident. Meanwhile, grief moved the other direction, out from the crime scene down 101 and into San Francisco's North Beach. Condor Club posted a message of sorrow, and longtime colleagues traded texts that didn't seem real. The shock wasn't just about a manager. It was about a presence, a person who had managed room staff schedules, and the strange weather of a late-night crowd. Then, Friday, October 24, the 3-week mark the case turned. Detectives moved to an apartment complex in Dublin, California, roughly 50 miles from the scene. There, at a building along the 7,500 block of St. Patrick Way, officers arrested 43-year-old Richard Anthony Lund. Later that same day, they intercepted 25-year-old Asia Lozano Morton at San Francisco International Airport as she returned from an overseas trip. Search warrants followed. Boxes left the apartment. Evidence bags filled. The narrative began to shift from who could have done this to, is this why it happened? As details emerged, a portrait of proximity and resentment took shape. According to police and multiple news outlets, both Lund and Morton had once worked at a San Francisco adult entertainment venue managed by Kalkagni. In recent weeks, they were no longer on the payroll. Investigators now allege that job loss may have mixed with anger planning and opportunity enough to turn a grievance into a plan. The working theory hardened Lund waited in the dark, and when Kalkagni returned home, the attack was carried out. Morton detectives said helped set the table. It is the kind of allegation that lands heavy method over impulse patience over panic. Even with arrests, the case refused to loosen its grip. Lund was booked on suspicion of murder and illegal gun possession. Morton, accused as an accessory after the fact appeared in court, entered a plea of not guilty and was placed under pretrial supervision while the investigation continued. The split in charges added a new layer of tension to an already tense narrative. Court calendars ticked forward. Lund's next appearance was set for November 13, while detectives kept working the blinds motive method and the trail that proves both. To understand why this case feels so eerie, it helps to trace the clock backward. Picture the window between 5:00 and 6:30 a.m., the hour when the night's last shift meets the city's first traffic. It's when porch lights click off and sprinklers stutter to life, when cyclists claim the empty lane and dog walkers map the same familiar loop. Into that fragile slot, someone inserted a plan. There's a reason investigators pay attention to timing. An early morning strike offers concealment and predictability. The target's routine is known. The streets are thinly populated. The exit routes are quiet. And yet the quiet cuts both ways, because in a calm neighborhood, one sharp sound draws witnesses' microphones and cameras like magnets that detectives suggested is part of how the case moved as fast as it did. And then there's the place itself, Santa Rosa, a city where the year's homicide count had already rattled nerves before October arrived. When police briefed the public, they were clear about one thing: this didn't look like a random predation. This looked like a targeted act tied to relationships and recent events, an attack with context. For the community, that distinction matters. For the victim's circle, it only deepens the ache, the kind that settles over a city when fear and grief intertwine. Santa Rosa isn't just a backdrop here. It feels like a living, breathing witness to violence that's starting to hit too close to home. When police say it wasn't random, it's almost worse because it means this wasn't chaos, it was intent. Someone made a choice. In the larger frame, the Condor Club's presence in this story gives it a kind of cultural echo. The club isn't just another address, it's an institution with a notorious past and an outsized footprint in San Francisco lore. That's why the North Beach reaction landed so hard, why tributes read like eulogies for a scene, not just a single man. The club's statement captured the mood. This was a loss, with a wide blast radius, one that dimmed a neon sign that has glowed through decades. But peel away the headlines, and you're left with the unnerving mechanics of premeditation, as police describe it, patience, surveillance, a return home window, a street chosen for its routine, an alleged waiting posture, each step small, the sum devastating. When detectives speak of lying in wait, they're describing a habit of mind as much as a posture of body, the willingness to let minutes pile up like kindling until a single spark is enough. Victim identification, time, location of the killing, and early investigative details were reported by CBS Bay Area, which noted Kalkagni was found around 6:30 a.m. in a bike lane on Brookwood Avenue near Birdfoot Way. From the first hour, investigators treated the scene not as chaos but as choreography, an attack staged with timing, patience, and an exit strategy. Detectives fanned out, canvassing homes and businesses, knocking on doors, and collecting time-coded clips. In neighborhoods like this, routine becomes a grid, and a single disruption leaves a digital bruise. Bit by bit, that bruise began to outline a shape. The shape looked like a compact SUV, a Toyota RAV4. It surfaced first as a reflection in a window, then as a taillight flicker in a traffic camera, and finally as a clearer profile sliding past a driveway lens. The vehicle wasn't proof on its own, but it was a thread that refused to break. Investigators pulled DMV records, cross-checked partial details, and asked neighbors if anyone new had started coming and going. In a case built on moments and margins, the RAV4 became the hinge an ordinary car turned into a signpost pointing toward a name. That name, investigators would later allege, was Richard Lund. The vehicle trail didn't stand alone. It connected to addresses, jobs, and the victim's orbit. As detectives built their time map, a selective pattern emerged. A car that shouldn't be there was there. A route that didn't belong suddenly did. According to the evolving theory, the driver didn't wander, he waited. The language of the case began to harden around the quietest posture imaginable, lying in wait. Whether that label survives the courtroom remains to be seen. But in the investigative timeline, it explains the unnerving precision of dawn. Yet metal and pixels were only part of the picture. Phones tell their own stories, where they traveled when they whispered to towers, how they synchronized with other devices. Detectives gathered call logs, messages, and location history, then pressed those details against their video grid. They were not only looking at Lund, they were mapping his proximity to Asia Lozano Morton and to the nightlife world where all three names overlapped. The question wasn't merely who was where, but who knew what and when. Every ping, every text, every silent overlap of two devices in the same sector became a small light in a larger constellation. Those lights extended beyond two people. Coworkers, friends, and acquaintances all carry fragments, screenshots, group chats, passing comments, and calendar notes. Investigators' sources say moved through that web, carefully collecting the kind of routine chatter that can suddenly read like foreshadowing. Planning doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it looks like logistics. A shift change, a ride offered, a question about timing. If the state's theory is correct, the communications trail will argue for intent rather than impulse, coordination rather than coincidence. Another element shadowed the case: Lund's prior record. In the sterile language of filings, a criminal history doesn't dictate guilt, but it does shape charges and context. It can also unlock separate counts tied to unlawful possession, an offense that lives parallel to the main allegation, but still exerts gravity in a judge's mind. Prosecutors tend to use such details like weight on a scale not to decide the outcome, but to argue how the pieces should be measured. In a narrative already edged with patience and planning, the mention of a prior record lands with unmistakable force, and still, the most conspicuous absence remains the weapon. No recovery means no straightforward match, the clean courtroom-ready pairing of barrel and bullet that juries intuitively understand. Without it, the state must weave a tighter net from other threads, tool mark impressions on recovered casings, caliber and pattern analysis, trajectory mapping inside the lane, residue patterns consistent with close-range discharge, and the echo of 5 reports captured on multiple mics. Add to that the vehicle pathway the camera frames, the phone overlaps, and the testimony of neighbors jolted awake, and a mosaic begins to form. The defense will probe every seam. In this way, the case becomes a duel between presence and absence. Presence: the RAV-E4 gliding past a camera, a device ping aligning with a timestamp, a message sent minutes before a car changes direction. Absence: the missing weapon, the gaps between frames, the silent spaces in a text chain where intent must be inferred. Prosecutors will argue that the pattern holds even where the lines are faint. The defense will argue that faint lines don't make a map. Between those positions sits a neighborhood that still hears the morning's 5 sharp cracks, and a timeline that suggests nothing about this scene was accidental. Ultimately, the story the state appears to be building is both modern and unnerving, a fatal attack revealed by a city's nervous system, its lenses, its microphones, its cell towers, and its citizens. No single element shouts. Together they whisper the same name. And while a courtroom will decide how the whispers add up, the investigative spine is clear. Cameras and witnesses set the stage. The RAV-E4 opened the door. The communications data walked through it. The prior record added weight, and the missing weapon turned the rest of the evidence into the main act. It's a puzzle assembled in the half-light of dawn, where the ordinary becomes ominous and the quiet keeps telling itself. From the outset, Irvine labeled the block evidence rich. It wasn't bravado, it was math. An upscale neighborhood means doorbell systems stacked end-to-end, traffic cameras on the arteries, joggers with smartwatches, dog walkers who know the sound of their own street. The timing only amplified that advantage. Between 5:00 and 6:30 a.m., houses stir, kettles click, and phones wake, meaning microphones and motion sensors do too. Whoever staged the attack chose an hour that gives an investigator a second pair of hands. You don't just leave footprints in neighborhoods like this, Irvine thought. you leave echoes. And those echoes began with the sound 5 sharp cracks that ricocheted through the morning and stamped a timestamp on the block. Irvin knew what came next: align those audio spikes with the camera frames. Does a porch light flare at the 3rd report? Does a parked car lurch? Does a dog flinch and drag its leash a step to the left? Stitch enough of those micro reactions together and you get a pulse, then a silhouette. Then if you're lucky, a plate make a model. In this case, the silhouette coalesced into a shape everyone recognizes: a compact SUV gliding just a shade too calm for a street that's just been shaken. That vehicle thread, Irvine believed, would be the hinge that swings the case open. It's never just one clip. It's a mosaic taillights in one angle, a reflection in a neighbor's window, a clean side profile on a driveway cam 3 doors down. You map them minute by minute until the route stops looking like chance and starts looking like intent. Once the car becomes more than a blur, you pull records, match colors, and test the path against work histories and home addresses. And when a name surfaces, you test it against the victim's orbit. Here, that orbit looped through San Francisco nightlife and back to a quiet lane in Santa Rosa, tightening the circle around a suspect investigators would later identify as Richard Lund. But the car was only in one language. The other language hummed in everyone's pockets. Irving's experience told him that phones don't just travel, they choreograph. They ping towers, sync with routers, and trace invisible paths that either dovetail or diverge. So he and his team would drag the lattice of call logs, texts, and location history across the video timeline and watch for the overlaps moments when devices belonging to Lund and Aja Lozano Morton breathed the same air or exchanged the same late-night messages. Planning rarely announces itself with a trumpet. It shows up as logistics. Are you still up becomes a breadcrumb. Leaving now becomes a knot in the rope. What made the hour so chilling in Irvine's view was the posture it implied: lying in wait. That phrase isn't flair. In California, it's a legal blade, a special circumstance allegation that can elevate a case to the state's harshest penalties if proven. It means patience before impact calculation, before contact. And yet, for all the poise suggested by that phrase, much about the operation looked strangely amateur. Choosing a camera-dense block, picking an hour when half the neighborhood is waking up, leaving the most critical object, the weapon itself, unrecovered. Every one of those choices hands an investigator leverage. Without the weapon, Irvine knew the case would be built with other tools, and that didn't scare him. You can still chart trajectory, match caliber, analyze tool marks on recovered casings, and let synchronized audio turn 5 reports into 5 anchors on a digital timeline. You can let a car's pathway play the role a barrel might have played, and you can let phone metadata do the talking a missing object refuses to do. In a modern case, the absence of one item often makes everything else speak louder. Still, Irvine refused to paint the nightlife world with a single brush. He's seen clubs where predatory elements try to lurk at the edges, and he's seen managers who hold the line with discipline and care. By all accounts, Mark had that reputation: a steady hand in loud rooms, respected by staff and performers. That contrast, Irvin felt, made the morning scene feel even colder. A man known for order, left in the middle of sudden disorder. And so the detectives' board filled with answers and with questions that wouldn't stop scratching at the edges. Why were Aja and Lund actually let go? Was there a deeper conflict buried under routine paperwork, a grudge, a debt, a slight that curdled over time? Where is the weapon and who moved it? If it isn't found, does its absence trace a new path to someone else's garage, someone else's trunk? Was Aja's trip abroad a getaway planned in advance or a last-minute leap? Do flight bookings, bank alerts, and chat logs agree or argue? Did a dog walker or a runner catch more than a sound? Did anyone actually see the posture, the stance, the face? And beyond the 2 names already on the board, is there a third presence, faint but real, just off camera? Each open question in Irvine's mind is not a hole, but a door. He pushes through one, and it opens into 3 more. The beauty and terror of an evidence-rich neighborhood is that it rarely offers a single story. It offers competing drafts. His job is to read them all and decide which draft bleeds into the next page without smudging. That's why even as arrests turned rumor into record, he kept circling back to the same loop at the same hour, playing the cameras in silence, listening to the morning breath and counting the 5 sharp cracks that rewrote a block's routine. By the time the sun lifts over Santa Rosa, the story has already moved from a quiet bike lane to a crowded calendar in a distant courthouse. The evidence map cameras, cars, messages, and early hour timing has given prosecutors a spine to their theory, and with it a grim forecast. If that spine holds through discovery and cross-examination, Richard Lund now stands at the edge of the state's harshest outcomes. The allegation of lying in wait isn't just a phrase. In California, it's a special circumstance that can expose a defendant if convicted to life without parole or even the state's maximum penalty under current law. Whether policy winds shift or not, the legal stakes do not. They tower. Yet trials are not math problems. They are storms. Juries don't measure certainty in headlines, but in exhibits, testimony, and the stubborn gaps between them. Which is why every missing piece becomes the defense's oxygen, and every aligned timestamp becomes the state's drumbeat. In this case, the drumbeat is unnervingly steady, a vehicle path that doesn't belong, a neighborhood of unblinking lenses and a window of time so narrow it reads like choreography. If those elements are welded together by credible witnesses and forensics, the road ahead for Lund turns steep. If even one of those welds cracks, reasonable doubt flows in like water. Parallel to that is the narrower, more intricate corridor where Asia Lozano Morton's fate will be decided. The state's theory sketches her as an aider after the fact, perhaps more an allegation that rises or falls on the language of communication. Here, words aren't just messages, they are potential instruments. If investigators can lay out a sequence of texts, calls, and location data that looks like coordination logistics that resemble planning rather than coincidence, the charge sheet could harden into something far heavier. But if the digital dust amounts to vague phrases, ambiguous timing, and the murky shorthand of late-night lives, a jury may see indecision where prosecutors see design. In that split, penalties can swing from severe to survivable, and then there is time itself. The slow, bureaucratic tide of a California docket. Even with public attention fixed on a case like this, calendars are unforgiving. Backlogs, motions, expert availability, and discovery disputes can push a soon into a season and a season into a year. Realistically, the earliest full trial window points into 2026. Between now and then, there will be hearings that look routine and filings that land like thunder. The story will reassemble itself in fragments. Ballistics memos, cell site maps, camera angle charts, until the picture is either undeniable or unsettled. All the while, the spotlight will lean perhaps unfairly toward the spectacle of adult nightlife. To the cameras outside the courthouse, club drama is an easy hook. To those who worked with Mark, it's a distortion. Colleagues describe a steady manager who kept complicated rooms calm, a person defined less by neon and more by order. That tension sensational framing versus the memory of a disciplined professional will shadow every headline. It's not just a prosecution of a person, it's a tug of war over a narrative, the darker corners of the night versus the quiet diligence required to manage them responsibly. Beyond the courthouse, the social ripples spread fast. Employers will see a cautionary tale about workplace resentments ignored until they calcify. Security planners will see a case study in the power of routine, how a predictable return home window can be both a target and a trap. Neighborhood groups will talk about doorbell cameras not as gadgets, but as neighborhood witnesses that don't blink. And workers across nightlife will weigh the fragile balance between the show the public sees and the scaffolding required to keep it safe. Still, for all the forecasts, humility is essential. A missing object can reappear. A reluctant witness can find a voice. A text thread can read differently when the full scroll finally loads. Trials curve, juries surprise, outcomes refuse to be domesticated by early certainty. The only prediction that feels safe is this: the case will be decided not by a single headline element, but by accumulation of frames, of footsteps, of phrases, of minutes spent waiting in the dark. If the state assembles those pieces into a continuous line, Lund faces a verdict that may lock the calendar to a single unending date. If the line stutters, the defense will ask the jury to hear the silence between the beats. And so the story arrives at a stark, uneasy summary. For Lund, the path ahead, if the allegations are proven, points toward a verdict at the highest end of consequence. For Morton, the slope depends on the clarity of her digital shadow. The more those communications look like a map, the steeper it gets. The more they blur, the more the ground levels. For the public, the lesson is colder than any headline revenge stews in ordinary places, and the hour that seems safest can be the one that leaves the longest echo. Until a jury speaks, every sentence must carry the weight of alleged and the presumption that guards us all. But even with that guard in place, the air around this case feels charged like the moment just before dawn when everything is quiet and every small sound seems to mean more than it should.